Welcome to Issues and Answers. I'm your host, Diane Kinderwater. Our future is at risk, and it is very troubling, and it is very critical. On this program today, like oftentimes here in Issues and Answers, we're going to discuss the state of education in our state of New Mexico. But you know, some people are calling the Southwest here in New Mexico perhaps the Appalachian region. Why is that? Well, in the program today, we're going to discuss the importance of educating our kids. And we're going to find out that money is not necessarily the answer, because we've seen about $1 billion more dollars. I've not said $1 million, $1 billion more dollars were infused in the educational system over the past few years, and the numbers just have not increased. And we're going to discuss perhaps why that is and what can be done. So even though I started this program by saying we are at risk, our future is at risk, there is actually some hope, because there's a program that has worked in Florida that we can discuss maybe for New Mexico. My guests today are Senator Sandra Rue, who is a member of the Education Committee in the Senate. Welcome to Issues and Answers, Senator Rue. And Paul Gessing, who is the Executive Director of the Rio Grande Foundation, which has studied this issue and actually brought the Florida model, which we're going to discuss on our program today, right here to New Mexico. He brought some experts from Arizona as well, who said, hey, we chose to look at something that was working, and we chose to decide for our state and our neighboring Arizona, things might work for us. Perhaps they can work right here in New Mexico. Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane.
Again, I started with a very dire kind of prediction, but something that perhaps is very true. Our state is at risk, and we have been called the Appalachia of the 21st century.
Right. Some academics, because of what's called the achievement gap, and the achievement gap is the difference in educational performance between minority groups, especially in New Mexico, that's Hispanics, and Anglos and Asians to a lesser extent. But the way these different groups perform on tests and exams all across the country has some people concerned that New Mexico, Arizona, and other states with large Hispanic populations are not going to be able to compete in the 21st century. And so, because they're being left behind, and demography is destiny. What does that mean? Well, you know.
And what do we mean by Appalachia? I think we all recall.
Appalachia is known as an impoverished region of the United States. It still is to a large extent, and the question is whether the Southwest and other states with large Hispanic populations will follow that lead and become impoverished states like West Virginia or some of the states in the Appalachians, or whether we'll make the reforms necessary to change the status quo and to succeed in education. And Florida, obviously a state with a large Hispanic population and growing, has made some reforms, made them 10 years ago. So we actually have very good data that we can show to see that they've actually succeeded in turning around, not just for Hispanics, but especially Hispanic test scores and performance among African Americans and Anglos. It's not geared towards any one racial group. It's geared towards the rising tide lifting all boats. But some boats that are at lower levels rise faster than others.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Senator Rue, you've been on the Education Committee for a number of years now, and we hear it time and time again, money is the answer, but we've pumped in about $1 billion the past several years. $1 billion.
Well, that's true. I mean, over the years, we've looked at various scenarios. We were talking about teacher merit system, three-tier licensure. If we put a lot of these things into place, we would see some better results as far as outcomes in the classroom. And there have been other things that we've done over the years, and we just haven't seen the results. The money has gone in, but we haven't seen the improved outcomes with student performance in the classroom. And I think that the thing right now is, some folks in education will tell you, if you ask the public, do you agree in supporting education? Will you pay, would you support more money or tax increases to support education? They'll answer yes, but I think the real salient question is, if you were to ask if you would agree to continue to fund and support education to maintain the status quo and to raise my taxes to support the status quo, the answer would be a resounding no. So that's where we're at right now. I think the real issue is the public is expecting some significant education reform with measurable outcomes where we can see if what we're doing is working.
Senator Rue, do they expect the reform, or do you think the public's still thinking the money? I mean, do they have the message, we spent $1 billion and think test scores haven't increased, the kids are not reading? I mean, do they still believe the misconception that money is the answer?
I think they get it now. I think that, the public has been very patient with public education. And I sense now that what I hear from my constituents, they're digging in their heels. Not another dime as far as increased taxes or increasing the funding to education until we see something in the way of meaningful education reform. And then I think people will be willing to do whatever they have to do to support that. But they're not getting a strong reform message from public education or from the legislature yet to this point.
Well, because maybe they didn't know what the answer was. I mean, we didn't maybe have a model in our country that was succeeding. I mean, we hear the test scores in Minnesota, Iowa, North and South Dakota. Those are high regions of education being strong. But in the past, have you been presented, Senator Rue, in the Education Committee, various models as you have just been presented the Florida model?
Well, we have. We've had the discussions, but we hear a lot of reasons and excuses about why it won't work in New Mexico. New Mexico's different. What works somewhere else won't work here. The great thing about the Florida model, and we did have that discussion this year in the interim, there are a lot of similarities between New Mexico and Florida as far as the demographics, you know, the minority population, those who are living at poverty level or near poverty level, and that's what Paul was referring to. You look at what they've done in Florida, not only does it do a lot to close the achievement gap, but it also, like Paul said, lifts the whole boat. The system in Florida isn't designed just to target specific demographics. It's designed to deal with the lower performing students in the aggregate, and then to, you know, address the entire student population, you know, with significant reform. So it's worked on several levels, and there's some really key things that have come out of this Florida reform model that I think we'll be looking at here, and probably you'll see some serious legislation come from this.
Okay, so Paul, the Florida model, 10 years ago, Governor Jeb Bush decided to institute that, and I think now Arizona has. Let's roll up our sleeves and discuss it. It says there's no one magic bullet, but maybe 10 magic bullets.
Right.
So let's start with the premise of what our fourth, I mean, we really rank our kids on what fourth grade reading levels here in New Mexico.
Well,
and that's what the Florida model is.
That is kind of the core premise of the Florida model, and that is that until third or fourth grade, kids are learning to read. So up until then, the biggest thrust of their educational achievement is gaining a grasp of the English language and how to read it, and of course write it as well. After that, for every subject except straight math, the kids are needing to use that reading skill in order to engage in science and history and other subjects. And if you don't catch them early, the chances are you're not going to catch them at all, and these are the kids that are going to drop out eventually. And so reading and early level reading is the key kind of crux of the Florida model. And the reforms that are in that model are geared towards those kids, but they apply throughout the system, and there are an array of reforms that the Florida model entails.
Okay, let's go through each piece, but first, so we have some believers here at KCHF TV. The fourth grade, if you have the statistics in front of you, the numbers, fourth grade in Florida, they were what, reading at the fourth grade level, what, low performance, proficiency, tell me about those numbers, and then what, after 10 years, they increased to?
Well, they judged it on what's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and that's a national test that we wouldn't have to institute any new tests here, and there's a lot of sensitivity over that kind of issue. This is given to a limited number of kids. It's not given to every kid, but it's statistically representative, and it showed in Florida a dramatic improvement among Hispanics especially, but all kids in the state of Florida. And essentially, before the reforms, these kids were reading or testing at a grade below on average. The Hispanic kids were testing at a grade below in the third grade, and nowadays they're testing at a grade above or so. So dramatic improvement in just 10 years, and there's no reason to believe that this can't continue. And Florida is not standing pat. They're going to continue to refine the Florida model and increase the effectiveness. So New Mexico, by not even taking step one, is really going to fall behind if we don't act now.
Senator Rue, do you know what the fourth graders here in New Mexico? I thought they were, what, 2 grade levels below?
Well, let me frame this in reference to Florida. As Paul said, what they've seen over the course of 10 years is those fourth graders were performing at 20 points greater than they were when they started this, and that is the equivalent of 2 grade levels. During that same time period, New Mexico fourth graders saw an improvement of 3%, which is less than one half.
I think 3 points.
3 points, correct, and that's
okay.
less than one half of a grade level. So you can see the difference.
So the Florida kids, 20 points, 2 grade levels, the same time period. New Mexico kids with no reform, 3 points or half a grade.
Correct, and that's all the
Okay.
students in the aggregate. One thing that's really interesting, if you break out the Hispanic student population, in that same period in Florida, they saw a 30-point improvement, which was the equivalent of 3 grade levels. So you talk about closing the achievement gap. I thought that was a very interesting thing that came out of that Florida model, and I think there's some things there that we can take.
So the study, Paul, shows it worked in Florida. Arizona believes it worked because they're going to institute it. And let's
Right.
go now to the more or less the 10 points, starting with maybe the most, well, they're all interesting, but let's start with the reading part of it. The kids, we have the social promotion. You can't read. If you can't read at 3rd grade, they
Right.
still go into 4th grade, 5th grade, and we find out as seniors they might be dropping out even before that, and they still can't read. So what about the social promotion
An effort
aspect?
to stop social promotion. If you don't know the material, especially in those early grades, you're not going to succeed later on. And there are limits to it. It's not in, you're not going to have 15, 16-year-old kids in 2nd grade. That's not the way it's going to work. What they've actually found is that the kids who are held back benefit dramatically, whereas the kids that are on the cusp, but just above the line where they'd have to come back to the same grade, don't benefit as much. So they actually benefit tremendously, and part of it is because parents,
Wait, excuse me, I didn't. The kids who are on the cusp who go on.
don't benefit as much. It's that being withheld that grade is tremendously beneficial to those kids. They've done, testing of that specific group that shows that they actually improve in the next year or two. And
Whereas his classmates who just kind of eked by.
right, don't have the same benefit.
Flounder for years.
And it makes sense because, teachers and parents have limited amounts of tools to really track an individual student's success and whether they're taking school seriously or whether they're being helped, whether at home or in the classroom. And being held back is a big deal. It is a wake-up call, and it is a sign. It's kind of that warning bell going off saying, hey, we need to act. And as long as kids are scooting through, whether they're barely succeeding or not succeeding at all, there's no warning bell going off. There's nothing to say, hey, attention, attention, we need
They're
to
at
address
risk.
this kid's
Attention,
education.
they're at risk. You
Right.
don't know that if
so
they're not.
that's
Okay.
one of the big
social promotion.
factors in there.
Here
One thing
you-
I think it's important, if I could, Dan, real quick, one thing about the Florida model, too, if they do hold these kids back, that's not the end of it. They allow them an opportunity to take the test again, if they just had some testing issues. And they also offer them some intervention and mentoring. So the system will engage those students right away and try to get them to a point where they can join their classmates as soon as possible. I think that's very important.
That's very important. Here in New Mexico, Senator Ruo, I'm sure we've discussed social promotion and the fact that the kids are promoted, but their tests aren't, just to keep up with their class, keep up with their peers in terms of age-wise. But what has the talk been about instituting it here? And there's been a resistance because it's not too popular. It's not too social.
Well, there's some issues there. I mean, this conversation we've had in my 2 years on the Education Committee. I know that Representative Jimmy Hall has been talking about this quite a bit the last couple of years. But you'll get some resistance. You'll hear a lot of talk about the costs associated with that, the problems, the confusion that it creates, the peer pressure that some of these students may have to face. But I think Paul pointed out the consequences of not intervening at that point, of not drawing the line in the sand, of not raising those red flags are more significant than any of the other ramifications. And I think that we've had that discussion, and I hope that we will perhaps begin to think about this as a component to overall education reform, another part.
Another point, Paul, is the fact that we have what now, proficient schools, less proficient, more proficient, some kind of fancy terminology perhaps of deciding if it's a good school, but we all know A, B, C, D, and F schools.
Exactly.
And we don't have that here in New Mexico, but Florida model chose to, hey, tell it like it is.
Yeah, that's according to Matt Ladner, the gentleman from Arizona who brought this here. He says that Jeb Bush, and he's worked with Bush closely, Bush said that the 8th rough is the most important thing. I think all of these are important, but having some kind of idea in parents' heads and the community's mind as to what their school is really doing in terms of other schools around the state is very, very important, because this mushy sounding language is totally inadequate. And if your school is failing, you want to know about it, and you should know about it. And it's in Florida, what they experienced is not people outraged at that school and giving up on it, but instead rallying as a group to help that school turn itself around. Not having information is terrible, and parents and the community really need to have that information available, and A through F is simply one method of communicating that.
And Jeb Bush thought that was one of the strongest proponents of this. A through F, wasn't there a time, Senator Rue, where we didn't even give, we didn't even give grades because they weren't touchy-feely?
Well, A through F is something.
The child to be receiving an F or a D.
Right.
So,
well, somebody made the comment that one of the successes in Florida was finally treating the parents as adults, telling it to them the way it is. And everybody understands the A through F scale. The problem with what we have right now, when you measure with the No Child Left Behind and some of the programs that are in place now, a school either fails or not. And then you hear a lot of excuses about why they did. If they fail on any one of the 37, I believe it is, components that they're measured against, they fail. That doesn't give parents in the community the information they need to know, how well are they doing, or to measure 1 year to the next. If they go from a C to a B, then the community, the parents will begin to understand. And Paul pointed out, the great thing about this program now in Florida is it tends to rally the community. Parents tend to want to get more involved. They understand that scale, and they
understand the scale.
And they want to get involved because they know they can affect outcomes when they can begin to measure it from year to year. And there's some accountability there, and something. The interesting thing about that, the New Mexico legislature in 2009 actually passed some legislation that would begin to enact something like this. For whatever reason, the Department of Education chose to ignore it. It was never implemented. So I would hope that perhaps we could bring that back, look at it, maybe tweak it. It's already in statute, and perhaps run that out, or if we have to start all over, we'll do that too. But the legislature made that effort, and it was not followed through, and I think that's troubling.
Bonuses, incentive bonuses, financial incentives. And
right.
These are for the schools, for the kids, if they pass with A's, or if they get passing grades in the advanced placement exams? Tell me about that.
It's really focused on the schools and the teachers themselves. And, the teacher unions tend to not like some of what happened in Florida, but the teachers themselves can rally around some of this stuff. And this is a big one. If you have kids and you work hard with them to promote their taking advanced placement tests, and they succeed on those tests, then there are rewards, cash rewards under the Florida model for the school. It circumvents the district, so it's a direct incentive for the school and the teachers themselves. Now there's caps on how much. You can't, there's not an unlimited supply of money, and especially in a tight budgetary climate, there's not unlimited funds, but there is a financial incentive for success, and that's great.
That's great, except, Senator Rouge, teachers are already getting paid to teach the kids. Why an incentive?
Well, I have a little trouble with that yet. I think that, a teacher is paid to be there to educate our children, I think, and do the very best they can to have them achieve and to meet their full potential. I have a little bit of a problem with that. And then it's also taking resources, limited resources, and giving it to the schools who are showing some great results. That's wonderful, but you can make the argument perhaps the schools that are still struggling to get their students up to proficiency are the ones that really need the money more, and perhaps the money should go there. Otherwise, I think you begin to perpetuate perhaps an imbalance that may exist in the system.
I thought, Paul, some of this was for the kids, because I've heard of other programs, I'm not sure if it's Chicago or something, the students themselves get money for getting good grades. It's not from their parents, which sometimes,
right.
Remember, if you got an A, you might got $1 from your parents or something, but I think some school districts now pay the kids to do well. And
that's certainly open to discussion as well. Again, financial resources in this regard are going to be limited. Florida has had tremendous success in having Hispanic kids especially perform and take these AP tests and pass them. And I think the one thing you have to look at in that regard that may be, in terms of resources, is that these kids, when they go on to college, if they take these advanced placement tests, can frequently test out of college classes. Thus, you're saving money on the back end.
There.
So,
wow.
I don't know how much of a net cost this would actually wind up being.
Tell me how vouchers and charter schools fit into the Florida model. We have charter schools here. We don't have any vouchers here in New Mexico. We don't have any tax breaks either for parents who choose to send their child to a private school. But tell me how vouchers have worked in Florida.
Well, it's a three-pronged choice system, and I would use the term choice. We're probably not going to do vouchers here in New Mexico. We've done charter schools, like you said, and the other aspect of this is tax credits. Really quickly, vouchers involve taking existing resources, giving kids a voucher, a amount of money so that they can go to the school of their choice. That's probably not going to happen. Tax credits allow individuals and perhaps companies to take a credit against their tax burden that the state would otherwise take in, donate to a nonprofit organization that then offers scholarships to low-income and needy children. And so it's not, I'm taking a tax credit, I'm wealthy, and giving it to my own kid. That doesn't work under this model. It's the people who have the tax burden donating that money to
kind of choosing rather than giving it to the corrections department. You get a choice. I owe my money, my taxes are across the board, but I choose to give my money to improve education.
And if you're not happy, the beauty of this model that you don't get under a voucher system is that there's a choice there among the donors of the money, that if the tax credit and the scholarship organization are not doing what they think should be done, they can go elsewhere. And you can also have this in your community. You know, someone from Farmington could give to a scholarship organization in Farmington, someone from Santa Fe in Santa Fe, and so on. And lastly, charter schools. Charter schools have come under some criticism with some Legislative Finance Committee, just to name one example. But charter schools offer a great deal of opportunity to kids who are not traditional learners, not interested in maybe going to college, but into a vocation. I've seen personally, firsthand, very good success coming from charter schools, and I think that New Mexico has a good law in that regard and needs to stick with it and expand those opportunities as well. So again, it's a Florida cocktail, if you will, of reforms and opportunities and choices. And if we have a good choice program that provides direct incentives for the schools to reform themselves and improve the results so that they are keeping those kids in those schools.
And they're part of the choice. They're back to being the choice. They have a Just Read Florida part of this program. Do you know about that, Senator Rubin?
Well, not so much about the curriculum, but one thing that's really interesting that they've done in Florida, and this is something I think we should consider doing here. We talked about the importance of the reading component to all this. You know, up to a certain point, they say kids learn to read, and then beyond that, about third, fourth grade, they read to learn, and there's a critical period there. What Florida did that's kind of interesting is they're requiring all of their teachers, their elementary teachers now, to have a component of their education and training that deals specifically with how to teach reading. It's more intensive than they had received before. They have to have that component to get their licensure. And some of the folks that have looked at the Florida model will pin a lot of the credit for their outcomes on that. They're getting their teachers trained better to teach reading. And they found that perhaps they didn't have all the skills coming in that they really should have. And some states have been very
Actually, that's a
aggressive.
great point that you raised, Senator Rubin, because why aren't kids learning to read? Is it because the parents aren't seeing that they go to school? I mean, there's that issue here in New Mexico, too. The parents aren't taking their responsibility, make sure their child, second grader, is making it to the classroom. But why aren't kids in New Mexico learning to read in first, second,
that's
third
a very
grade?
good question, and there's no single answer, just like there's no single solution. But I would say that people who blame the parents are not looking at the entire picture, because we are paying a lot of money and putting children into schools for long periods of time, and those schools need to be difference makers. They can't just help a kid who's already got two parents at home refine their reading skills. You know, a two-parent family that has time to read to their kid, that's great, and I applaud them, but schools need to be able to work with the child of a single-parent mother or single mother, or someone who doesn't have an ideal family structure at home. Those are the kids that schools are more important than anything for. If those schools fail those children, you know, wind up in the criminal justice system, like you said. So it's not good enough to blame the parents. We need schools to do their jobs and to do it effectively. And you may not reach every single child. There's no single silver bullet that's going to cause that, but you need to have the schools step up.
Very good. And Senator Rue, I think you like the licensure part that Florida has in terms of a teacher here in New Mexico or somebody who's a professional in another area would like to teach the kids, feel that they're very motivated to do it, they have to jump through a lot of hoops to do it.
Well, we have, that's one thing Florida did. They get a lot of their teachers now through this alternative, teacher licensure. What that does essentially is it's getting individuals that don't necessarily come right up through school, through college of education, and then going right into teaching. This is designed for people who maybe have been working, have had a career in the real world, and now they're interested in teaching. So they come back and they get their teacher certification and they come into the schools. They say in Florida they've seen some real benefit from that. People coming into the classroom with real world experience, who have actually been out there and worked in science and industry or whatever the case may be.
But they're helping them get their license. I mean, it isn't time consuming.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, they have to be licensed and they have to meet certain criteria to be in the classroom interacting and teaching our children. It shouldn't be, a very difficult thing to do, and there's a system in place. We actually do that in New Mexico. So that's something that we really do have in place. To the extent that we make it easier or perhaps, change up the criteria, we could look at that. But that doesn't cost us anything. And the same thing about the teachers in teaching in our elementary schools, having that another component to their training that is really looking at the new science about how to teach reading. That's something we could do at low or no cost.
Is this something that we're out of time? I think we've hit all the high points, Paul.
Just about. There's virtual education, which is very brief, but that really appeals to some of the rural communities, and it provides educational options where choice and tax credits and those kinds of things are unavailable. So someone on the Navajo reservation could learn Mandarin Chinese or learn a type of physics that's not taught in their local school through virtual education. And the one thing that I need to mention about that is that when the companies that handle virtual education, they have to teach that kid or they don't get paid. And that is a novel approach in education.
You're going to be looking at these points. Senator Rue, thank you. This next committee coming up, a lot of busy session we have, and we'll touch upon education and other programs, of course. As we do, here's a public service to you, our viewers at KCHF. Paul Gessing, the Executive Director, Rio Grande Foundation, thank you so much for being here. Senator Rue, thank you for your passion for education and being on the Education Committee. Again, we appreciate your time. And I appreciate you watching. Go out and make it a great week with your family, and happy holidays. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Presidential palace has been destroyed. Buildings like this have been destroyed. On this side is a tent city.